LGB. 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 LGB.
They say LGB everywhere I go. LGB. What it means, I don't know. LGB. Whatever it is. LGB. Kamala, help me, please. Please.
Alrighty then.
Thank you. LGB.
That's let's go, Brandon, right?
LGB.
This means let's go, Brandon.
No. LGB.
Sounds like let's go, Brandon, I guess.
LGB. All right. Let's go, Brandon.
I am Cornholio.
Chant LGB. Right wing and left wing. LGB. Go, you know the thing. LGB. If you don't sing that back. LGB. And you ain't black. LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
FJB. Let's go, Brandon.
I'm Joe Biden, and I forgot this message.
Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels, joining you from Houston, Texas, this March 4th, 2024 at 10:26 a.m. Central Standard Time. I am going to be presenting one piece today, and that is Dr. Naomi Wolf's review of Donald Trump's address at this year's CPAC in National Harbor, Maryland. And it's an important article. As you probably know, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Wolf's writing and of her activism. I think that I have a lot to say about this particular piece of hers. And I think it's important to address the paradigm from which Dr. Wolf is speaking, to evaluate the degree to which that paradigm applies in today's era. And because I think it's so important, after this reading concludes, I'm going to be joined by my friend, I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Those of you who know me know that he officiated my wedding. We're friends, and we would like both to talk about this topic. My admiration for Dr. Wolf is in her writing, in her willingness to come around on a lot of issues. Her personal journey is an inspiring one for me. Between her and also James Dellingpole, who also comes from that old mainstream media paradigm, but is an awakening mind himself. These are rare people, and I think it's important to focus on a lot of their work. So that's where I'm coming from here. Before we get started, don't forget, guys, wow, orange angel paste. This is the best stuff you're ever going to put on your skin. It consists of only food grade, organic certified plant oils, and also infused this time. It's going to ship on March 8th. Infused with sweet orange essential oil, which gives you a burst of vitamin C. Do you know where most vitamin C is gotten from? From freaking mold. Yeah, they do. They get it from freaking mold. Now, it might be perfectly fine vitamin C, but this vitamin C comes straight from oranges, which are distilled into essential oils. It's great for your skin. Don't go sunbathing right afterwards. Putting vitamin C on your skin makes you more makes you more sun sensitive. But it's the best smell I've ever. I love this so much. Put this on, maybe a little rose with it. Mix and match, guys. I can't tell you how much I love this stuff. Your skin drinks it up, and it smells like you are in the middle of an orange juice factory. It's amazing. Angelpaste.com, promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands. And if you go to epicthreads.tv, you can order internationally. So there's all sorts of options here, guys. Don't forget epicthreads.tv. We're getting a lot more stuff there, but you can also get it at angelpaste.com. Your skin will drink it up. All right, let us go ahead and begin the piece from naomiwolf.substack.com, covering President Donald Trump at CPAC. Notes from a former political consultant by Dr. Naomi Wolf. This is one of those essays I fear to write. I fear that those who are passionate admirers of President Trump will take umbrage at my notes about his recent speech at CPAC, and that those who are appalled at the mere mention of his name will be even angrier at me than they usually are, as in this essay I treat him seriously as a presidential candidate. As many know, I used to be a political consultant for President Clinton's re-election campaign in 1996 and for Vice President Gore's 2000 presidential campaign. Before I was a consultant, I was a White House spouse. My then husband was a speechwriter for both President Clinton and for Mrs. Clinton. I became familiar from an observer's distance with the intense cycle of presidential speechwriting and revision. Then I became a consultant and a participant in observing the speechwriting process myself. Though I signed NDAs and thus can't discuss the details of my work for either campaign, I can speak generally about what I learned, about what can be helpful for a candidate for the presidency, and about the common stumbling blocks that face all candidates for that U.S. office. I also learned from both roles about the message process. This is the daunting task that a team of media specialists undertakes of getting the press corps to cover what is actually in the speech, ideally focusing their stories on the policy centerpiece of the speech rather than running stories that elide the speech together to focus on some random clickbait. It was extraordinary for me to learn how often the National Press Corps simply does not report on the contents of a president's or a candidate's speeches, no matter how important the content is, or even run a link to the transcript, but will rather run stories about the speech occasion that are really about the audience, or a recent scandal, or a poll, or whatever the First Lady was wearing. For a speech by a U.S. president or presidential candidate to be successful, that is, covered accurately in the media with the main points highlighted, and ideally to push the agenda or polls, and to be remembered positively by posterity, the message team must also follow certain methodologies in the production of the speech and its distribution to the press. And after that, the advanced team, the people who execute the mechanics of the principal's appearance at a venue, prepare the green room, deliver the candidate physically, seat the press, seat VIPs, launch the music, light the stage, distribute press materials, must also take certain steps with care. After all of this preparation, the candidate or the president, him or herself, must be disciplined in giving the speech as a performance to a live crowd. He or she must not yield to the strong temptations to pander to the crowd, to extemporize in damaging ways, to go on too long in response to rapturous audience reactions, to pursue rabbit holes tangential to the momentum of the speech, or to take defensive swipes at critics. This refusal to be tempted, of course, in all of these and other ways, and to stay, as we say, on message, is called, in that world, message discipline. In my role as visiting professor of rhetoric at George Washington University, where I taught the history of advocacy rhetoric, I learned what it was that made for great public speeches in Western history in general. My findings from the research I did there, combined with what I learned from the other roles I mentioned, all these information streams confirmed that the elements of a great public speech in the West, and certainly a great presidential speech or campaign speech in America, are systematic and universal. A great public speech in the West, one that is memorable and effective and changes the listener so that he or she wishes to support that leader's vision, shares certain key attributes. By the same token, presidential or presidential candidates' speeches fail, no matter what the principal's background or political orientation is, for similar reasons. Briefly, 1. Great public speeches must have a clear introduction. Within the first few paragraphs, the audience must know, what is this speech about? What is the thesis statement of this speaker? As they ask in Journalism 101, who, what, where, when. Here is 5th century BCE, Athenian statesman Pericles' great oration upon the death of Athenian historian and general Thucydides. Quote, I will speak first of our ancestors, for it is right and seemly that now, when we are lamenting the dead, a tribute should be paid to their memory. There has never been a time when they did not inhabit this land, which by their valor they will have handed down from generation to generation, and we have received from them a free state. But if they were worthy of praise, still more were our fathers, who added to their inheritance, and after many a struggle transmitted to us, their sons, this great empire. And we ourselves assembled here today, who are still, most of us, in the vigor of life, have carried the work of improvement further and have richly endowed our city with all things, so that she is sufficient for herself both in peace and war. But before I praise the dead, I should like to point out by what principles of action we rose to power, and under what institutions and through what manner of life our empire became great. Our form of government does not enter into rivalry with the institutions of others. Our government does not copy our neighbors, but is an example to them. It is true that we are called a democracy, for the administration is in the hands of the many and not of the few. But while there exists equal justice to all and alike in their private disputes, the claim of excellence is also recognized, and when a citizen is in any way distinguished, he is preferred to the public service, not as a matter of privilege, but as the reward of merit. Neither is poverty an obstacle, but a man may benefit his country, whatever the obscurity of his condition. While we are thus unconstrained in our private business, a spirit of reverence pervades our public acts. We are prevented from doing wrong by respect for the authorities and for the laws, having a particular regard to those who are ordained for the protection of the injured, as well as those unwritten laws which bring upon the transgressor of them the reprobation of the general sentiment. Because of the greatness of our city, the fruits of the whole earth flow in upon us, so that we enjoy the goods of other countries as freely as our own. End quote. From these two paragraphs, Pericles' audience understood that while the occasion was Thucydides' funeral, the subject was Athenian democracy in relation to themselves, and its corollary, civic freedom, its practice, impact, and resonance. By using the occasion to mourn as an occasion also to remind Athenians that generations before them had fought to preserve their civic liberty and their rule of law, and by noting that the freedoms and public life they inherited protect and benefit them, Pericles reinforced his listeners into a civic community with shared values of utmost importance. That action of community reinforcement and reunification is a key purpose of a successful U.S. presidential speech. A great American presidential speech should remind Americans of their story, their place in the generations, and the need for them always to recommit as a community to the practice and defense of freedom. 2. A great presidential speech must have a clear structure. The listener must always know where he or she is within the unfolding of the argument. This gives the speech a sense of momentum. John F. Kennedy's inaugural address is a good example of a presidential speech with a mappably clear structure. President Kennedy, as many know, was a devoted reader of the classics. The central premise of President Kennedy's inaugural address is that he is renewing, like Pericles, ancestral vows to defend freedom. In the center of his address, he offers a series of pledges. The pledges have to do with foreign policy. They spell out the post-war role of the United States as the global beacon and template of liberty. They identify, though in poetic language, that owes much to Pericles and other Athenian orators, a clear international policy that rewards freedom-oriented post-colonial nation-states and threatens to deter tyrannies. Quote, "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge, and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves for whatever period is required. Not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. To our sister republics south of our border, we offer a special pledge to convert our good words into good deeds in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. But this peaceful revolution of hope cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Let all our neighbors know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas, and let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house. Finally, to those nations who would make themselves our adversary, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew the quest for peace before the dark powers of destruction unleashed by science engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction. End quote. From Kennedy's inaugural address, usually the only remembered phrase is near the conclusion. Quote, "In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it, and the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." End quote. However, this extraordinarily memorable phrase that 4 subsequent generations have used to summarize the hopeful idealism and spirit of national unity of Camelot would not have been so easy to lift out if the inaugural speech itself, which is only 1,366 words long, were not so crisply structured. 3, the successful presidential or candidate's speech must clearly spell out the policies proposed. President Clinton was elected in 1992, and his early speeches were a nightmare. They were wonky, a word that seemed coined specifically for him and his policy team. They were wordy and circular and repetitive, worst sin of all. They used insider jargon more suitable to a Columbia University economics seminar than to a speech for Americans from every walk of life. President Clinton's popularity was at its lowest, and his media critics were at their most effective when his speeches had these burdens of language because the people themselves literally could not understand what he was saying. The whiff of elitism embedded in this kind of language did not help him either. When people don't understand or like a president's speeches, it creates a media vacuum. And then scandal, rumor, gossip, sniping, and nonsense enter the void and dominate the press's coverage of that presidency. By 1996's State of the Union address, President Clinton had become much better at speaking in plain English and in presenting an organized policy list in simple terms. President Clinton used the opening paragraphs of his State of the Union, the top real estate rhetorically, to showcase indisputable statistics and concrete benchmarks. Quote, "The State of the Union is strong. Our economy is the healthiest it has been in 3 decades. We have the lowest combined rates of unemployment and inflation in 27 years. We have created nearly 8 million new jobs, over 1 million of them in basic industries like construction and automobiles. America is selling more cars than Japan for the first time since the 1970s, and for 3 years in a row, we have had a record number of new businesses started in our country. Our leadership in the world is also strong, bringing hope for a new peace. And perhaps most important, we are gaining ground in restoring our fundamental values. The crime rate, the welfare and food stamp rolls, the poverty rate, and the teen pregnancy rate are all down." End quote. He then parsed the speech cleanly into 7 challenges: to strengthen America's families, to provide Americans with educational opportunities, to help every American who is willing to work for it achieve economic security, to take our streets back from crime and gangs and drugs, to leave our environment safe and clean for the next generation, to maintain America's leadership in the fight for freedom and peace throughout the world, and lastly, to reinvent our government and to make our democracy work for citizens. Each challenge, subheadline, subhead in the lingo, was buttressed by his itemization of specific accomplishments of his administration, ranging from a voucher system for retraining for new jobs, to Congress banning gifts and meals from lobbyists, to the shrinking of the federal government under his watch, to his signing an executive order to deny federal contracts to businesses that hired illegal immigrants. Most remembered from this speech was his third way approach to welfare reform. Quote, "I say to those who are on welfare, and especially to those who have been trapped on welfare for a long time, for too long, our welfare system has undermined the values of family and work instead of supporting them. The Congress and I are near agreement on sweeping welfare reform. We agree on time limits, tough work requirements, and the toughest possible child support enforcement. But I believe we must also provide childcare so that mothers who are required to go to work can do so without worrying about what is happening to their children. I challenge this Congress to send me a bipartisan welfare reform bill that will really move people from welfare to work and do the right thing by our children. I will sign it immediately." End quote. Some reporters made fun of his granular approach, this itemization of his achievements and goals down to the level of the details around banning meals for lobbyists. Others criticized him for being policy-oriented at the expense of soaring rhetoric. But I would say that these down-to-earth, well-structured itemizations of easy-to-understand mainstream policy goals and results saved his presidency. Because the man or woman in the street could understand President Clinton's speeches and could thus credit his administration for working hard to get deliverables to them and their families, the precious swing voters that any candidate needs in order to win voted him in twice, the second time with an even greater margin. As importantly, the coverage of his speeches actually often included these easy-to-lift-out, bullet-pointed lists of real outcomes. These Clintonian speeches coincided, I would say not randomly, with the high points of his popularity. They gave him, in my view, some of the political capital in the bank that allowed him to survive the sexual scandal that broke the following year and an impeachment. 4. Finally, the greatest presidential speeches must have clear and poetic imagery and tell stories. President Reagan was called the great communicator. Credit for this characterization should really also go to his gifted speechwriter, Peggy Noonan. It was she who brought the uplifting, spiritually oriented, and poetic language into Reagan's most remembered speeches. A beautiful example of her work is the speech that President Reagan gave upon the 1986 explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, which killed, quote, 7 heroes, 7 male and female astronauts on board, on live television. Like some of the greatest American presidential speeches, this elegy was very brief, only 648 words. It owes a great deal to the Gettysburg Address of 1863, which in turn also owes a great deal to Pericles' funeral oration. The Challenger speech, offered to a shocked and mourning nation, concluded with an unforgettable image directly lifted from a poem titled High Flight by John Gillespie McGee, Jr. Quote, "The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." End quote. Why do I recap the high points of my class on the history of rhetoric and my findings from my consultant's life about what makes a great presidential speech? Because I watched President Trump speak at CPAC. It was the second time I had heard him in person give a speech, and I have some, perhaps unasked for, notes. I am not partisan, but as you know, I think our country is in dreadful trouble. I think it has already been captured. In my view, any non-globalist, nationalist candidate running in 2024 should be heard as loudly and clearly as possible so that citizens can make the best possible choices this fall. President Trump is in many ways a great speaker. The crowds that assembled to watch him in the massive ballroom of the Gaylord Hotel were ecstatic. But there were, in my opinion, addressable problems and real missed opportunities in his speech. First of all, it is difficult for me as a reporter trying to cover the speech to tell you what he said in terms of the meat of it, the substance. He came onto the stage after pounding pop and country hits had energized the audience, looking fit and well. He wore his signature navy blue suit with boxy shoulders, white shirt, and red tie. His hair was more gray than red blonde. He looked less like a celebrity and more presidential. The crowd was screaming with joy. But if I were his consultant, I would have observed that crowd's ecstasy with mixed satisfaction and alarm. His live audience's impact on his own delivery style and his choices on stage is not necessarily good for his outcomes this fall. President Trump spoke scathingly about the failures of the Biden administration, the poverty and homelessness in our cities, crime and lawlessness, and the open border. He vividly painted, mostly extemporaneously, a picture of the ruin and degradation in just 4 years of a once great nation. However, when he turned to his own plans for his second administration, he was far less specific. He essentially said at one point that his main policy objective for his next administration was to make America great again. This got a roar of approval from the audience, but it was not answer enough, I argue, for the undecided or swing voter or for the homeless former Democrat. President Trump was very clear on some of his themes and plans, but quite vague or rhetorical when it came to others. He was very strong on his past achievements and his future plans in terms of foreign policy. He told again the story, and it is a satisfying story, of how he had used the threat of tariffs to get Mexico to provide military security at our southern border. He was extremely detailed and specific about how he will close the borders and deport the illegal aliens who have entered our nation by the millions. But even with the discussion of foreign policy, his language was often anecdotal and personal, with almost no analysis. He presented a series of meetings with tough leaders who reacted well to his own toughness. Swing or undecided voters are in anguish about our environmental problems, but President Trump merely gestured at the environment, wanting to make America beautiful again with almost no specifics. He claimed a strong economy in his past administration and promised, as I recall, a strong economy in the future, but it is difficult to recall his specific policy proposals to achieve this. Unfortunately, in between what were far too few concrete descriptions of his past achievements for our nation, which I had learned only by looking them up directly earlier, had, to my surprise, been considerable. He often committed the kinds of rhetorical lapses that would give thoughtful, experienced advisors watching high blood pressure. He digressed. Oh, how he digressed. Some of his digressions were hilarious. For instance, he brilliantly told a self-deprecating story about landing in Air Force One in Iraq in a state of anxiety in total darkness. It was fall on the floor funny. It got peals of laughter. But there he left it. He had said earlier in the speech that he had started no new wars, which could be highlighted as a huge deliverable, appealing to all voters. But he did not tie this anecdote to that larger point. Indeed, he tied that story to no larger point at all about Iraq or about fear or about conflict. If he had had a tough speech editor, the editor would have red-penciled the anecdote. What point are you making here? Conclusion needed. President Trump took swipes at the obvious dementia of President Biden that were, again, meanly funny and that got big laughs. But he could have made that same point more sadly and gently. He could have thus gotten the votes of all those who worry about President Biden's mental state and also added all those who are caring for a loved one with dementia, not a small voter category. I registered, listening as a journalist, that those moments would be lifted out by the media to portray him negatively. He told hilarious anecdote after hilarious anecdote. The problem is that the live audience loved him. His live audiences always adore him. That is not news. The CPAC crowd cherished the personal stories, the improv, the humor. But there are some problems with his speech style for the rest of us. One issue is that such speeches guarantee poor press coverage. I, as a member of the press, watched nearly half an hour of his time go to hilarious anecdotes, repetitions, mean swipes, and charming jokes in such a chaotic and circular way that, as I noted above, it is very difficult indeed for me to write an article pinpointing what exactly his speech was about. The circularity, digressions, and repetitions also prevented the speech from having the liftoff that a great speech delivers, that sense of moving with the speaker through time to arrive at a new destination. If I were an advisor of his, and I'm not angling for a job, just imagining his staff's tasks in handling him, I would be gritting my teeth at the half hour of digressions because they took up so much room that there was no systematic summary by the end of his time of what he had achieved for the country during his first 4 years, nor a clear projection of what he would do for us in the next 4 years. As noted, when the press can't easily lift out the bullet points of a speech, they fill the space under the deadline with mean quotes, gossip, scandal, invective, and what President Trump calls fake news. But why needlessly give them the opportunity to do this? President Trump is not the only candidate whose best talents can be killed or diverted or suffocated with undue responsiveness to live audience love. President Clinton had similar faults. Both were or are so good with live audiences that they seduce and are seduced by the live audience, leaving the press and the viewers at home who may not be so in love with the candidate often bored or restless or unmoved. I watched the reaction of the press corps around me and observed my own internal responses. A meme that circulated later on social media, a snapshot of a reporter playing a digital card game while covering President Trump's speech at CPAC, seemed to those who were sharing it like a criticism of the reporter in question. But speaking as a neutral observer and as a reporter, it's actually a criticism of the candidate. A great speech, or even just a substantive speech, will rivet any audience member, even if he or she is politically opposed or neutral. During various flights of Trumpness that led the live audience into paroxysms of adoration, I felt the same sense of detachment as did the reporter who was playing digital hearts. Why? Because President Trump seemed to be speaking only to those who were already besotted and not making his case to the rest of America. The live audience at CPAC is not everyone, President Trump forgot. I felt that he was speaking not just to his base, but potentially to millions of undecided Americans who were watching at home. All candidates can fall into the trap of mirroring only the concerns and language of their bases and forget that most of the country has to vote for you if you're to win. Many phrases that President Trump used at CPAC were right, perhaps just for his base, but wrong for a general audience. For instance, he did little to distinguish legal from illegal immigrants, which vagueness allowed the press inaccurately to call him anti-immigrant. Candidates for president in the past only became president when they solved this problem of moving from their appeal to the base, which the population alone can never get you elected or even outdo the cheating margins, to an appeal to the moderate middle. An example of this evolution was when President Clinton moved from the language of welfare to welfare reform, or when candidate Bush II said about abortion, "Good people can disagree." The best and most influential speeches of Presidents Lincoln, Kennedy, Reagan, Clinton, and Bush II appealed to the us in Americans and were inclusive, not narrowly partisan. There was another moment in which I thought President Trump burned political capital needlessly. He pointed directly at the media seated. He literally pointed his index finger at us far in the back of the ballroom and at the video and TV cameras too, and said the fake media were corrupt. Not some in the media, not many in the media, but the fake media. Why do this? Certainly the legacy media have been and are usually corrupt in covering President Trump. I acknowledge this in my essay, Dear Conservatives, I Apologize. That moment of attacking the press, which I believe is repeated in other speeches of President Trump's, was pure red meat for the crowd. They howled with joy. But if I were advising President Trump, I would warn him against the temptation of catering to that live reaction. What if there were a few reporters in that ballroom who were open to writing positive or at least neutral stories about the speech? I was seated in the group that had the accusing finger pointed at us from the stage. It was an unpleasant experience, and it felt unjust. Not every reporter is corrupt. Also, power balances can shift in the course of a campaign, and an editor who has commissioned nothing but hit pieces in the past can shift to neutral or positive stories when the polls evolve. But the polls won't evolve much, and nasty coverage won't change if President Trump continues so flamboyantly to make a wholesale enemy out of all of the press as a category. Lastly, there were some miscalculations, in my view, by his advance team. One is that, as I mentioned, the press corps was seated at the far rear of the ballroom. It felt stigmatizing to be seated further away from the candidate than anyone else. Other campaigns seat the press up front or at the sides of the stage, or even on the floor at the foot of the stage. This proximity has many advantages. One is that when photographers are seated at the foot of the stage, they are forced to shoot with their camera lenses angled upward. This angle reproduces a long-standing visual convention in art history and now in politics that portrays someone as heroic. If photographers are seated far away rather than at the foot of the stage, they take level photographs and video of the candidate. Compare the above to President Obama's imagery and President Clinton's, whose staffers forced photographers to shoot upward from beneath the podium. This heroic angle actually derives from classical imagery of leaders. Notice that heroes are always on plinths or on horseback. This heroic angle has been exploited by fascists, communists, and leaders of free societies alike. Aesthetics aside, there were other omissions that prevented positive or even substantive coverage of President Trump's CPAC speech. Our advance teams back into the 1990s would give press kits to all media present with a speech summary clearly presented and the bullet points and key quotes already lifted out. This gave reporters no excuse not to report what was in the speech. At CPAC, there was no such summary or bullet-pointed press kit distributed to us, to my knowledge at least. So a reporter heading back to his or her hotel would be forced to rely on wading through a transcript, rewatching the speech and taking notes, incredibly slow and laborious when one is on deadline, or else be driven to simply recycle, again, gossip, innuendo, slander, and some quote from a random purported Nazi at CPAC, if one could be found. My view of press coverage is that the subject always has a responsibility, at least, to make it easy for the press to understand what was said. If the press has that summary in hand and then smears or misreports the speech, that's fully on them. But if one leaves gaps, such in press outreach, or one bears some responsibility for poor or non-existent or fake news coverage of a candidate or a speech. And indeed, the reports of the CPAC speech were full of fake news. Rolling Stone's headline was, "Self-proclaimed dissident Trump rails on Newsom, calls migrants' languages a horrible thing." This is Rolling Stone's summary of the speech. Quote, "The hour-and-a-half rambling speech covered Trump's typical gamut, where he touted his cognitive abilities while demeaning President Biden's, defended Jan 6th insurrectionists, ripped on the media, and preached a doomsday scenario if he is not reelected. He compared migrants to Hannibal Lecter, claiming they are terrorists who are killing our people, and a contagion, echoing his previous Hitler-like poison the blood rhetoric," end quote. Would you vote for someone who did all of this? Most Americans would not. So, the CPAC speech itself is misrepresented grossly by this Rolling Stone summary, but also it isn't. Unfortunately, President Trump was indeed so loose and anecdotal so often in his detours and riffs that these words could indeed be lifted out of the verbal spaghetti on the plate and presented thus damagingly out of context. Here is the Washington Post's transcript of the speech. You can see its discursiveness and treacherous lack of structure for yourself. Link in the article. Why not say many or some illegal immigrants are terrorists? Why not say many or some in the media are corrupt? I was there. listening as President Trump did his jazz extemporaneous riff on the many languages of the illegal immigrants. I knew when he said it's a horrible thing that he was talking about the entire scenario that preceded that statement, the invasions, the crimes, the lawlessness. But my reporter brain recognized the bingo moment. I knew that other reporters would lift out the phrase, it's a horrible thing, and relate it just to the preceding sentences about foreign languages being spoken. And I knew with what aversion, swing, or undecided voters would hear that. Why make these careless lapses in specificity, which are so easy for a hostile press to exploit? Why? By not giving the press a tight printed speech with bullet points and summary, and by not training the candidate to stay on message, pave the way for President Trump's critics to dismiss him as rambling. Why? Why, if you support this candidate's policies, make it so easy for his critics to smear him entirely? I am in the sad position of having seen President Trump twice and having been impressed, wholly against my will, by much of what he had to say. Most of the rest of the country has not had that experience. Their knowledge of him is filtered through this hostile media. He can win if he and his team prioritize message, discipline, structure, and good advance work. His adoring base will send me angry emails now, no doubt. We love him just the way he is because he is real. He does not talk like politicians. That is why we love him. And I am sure that that is true. But the rest of the country is not so all-embracing. And any good candidate with his or her speechwriter can attain a healthy balance, offering structure and adding flights of seeming but carefully vetted improvisation that do not get the candidate in trouble again and again with the press and with undecided voters. There is a way to improvise so that vagueness and rhetorical lapses do not drown out the overall very important policy message. I guess what I'm saying is that President Trump's speeches and speaking style do not do justice to his record of achievements and actually sometimes undermine many people's ability to understand and evaluate his record. President Trump, indeed any nationalist candidate running for U.S. president in 2024, should take a careful look back at the great speeches of the past, including the great American presidential speeches. These candidates should, in my humble view, rein in their human inclinations to respond primarily to the swooning responses of their live audiences and their devoted bases. They should remember that the great and successful U.S. presidential candidates, and indeed the great U.S. presidents, spoke with focus and discipline and strength and a sense of mission. And they did all of this by addressing the better angels of our nation as a whole, and by issuing historic and future-oriented calls to duty and unity to all of the American people. All right, let's go ahead and yap about it. I have right here in front of me in my very own Reading Epic Fred studio. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Chris, great to have you here, bro. How you doing?
Great to see you. The horrors persist, but so do I.
As do I. It's one of the most wonderful things about this business. The horrors persist, and we get to talk about them.
Yes.
Just a reminder, everybody, Orange Angel Paste does go ship out the door on March 8th. Pre-order now at epicthreads.tv or angelpaste.com. Promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands. Best smelling lotion that I've ever smelled. And I had the rose scented lotion. Now it's the orange infused, dude. Did you know that vitamin C is usually harvested from mold, Chris?
I did not know that.
Yep.
That makes me feel kind of strange.
It is. It's probably fine. For real. It probably is fine the way that they refine it. I've talked about it with Dr. Lee Merritt, but they do take it off of mold. This infusion, this is harvested from oranges. So if you really want some really pure vitamin C on your skin, get the orange infused. We ship on March 8th. Angel Paste, your skin will drink it up. Chris, what did you think about this Naomi Wolf piece? I'm a big fan of Naomi Wolf, and I feel like I had some pretty decent room to criticize a lot of the premises of what I saw in this speech, and I thought you'd be the other person who might find a little bit to refute.
Yeah, I think that is, I think you're having exactly the right thought. I have a lot of respect for Naomi Wolf. Like me, she is a former liberal who spent a lot of time in liberal elite circles and society. So I respect immensely what she is doing. I am not 100% convinced that this is not leading to ultimately a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Supportive position for her in general. But again, I respect the hell out of her work. I respect the hell out of how brave she has been to this point in addressing the problems with elite American liberalism and progressivism, the system and society from which she came. She goes on War Room quite a lot. So I've appreciated her there. And she has a project that has brought in all sorts of people from around the country to collectively analyze the vaccine documents that were intended to be hidden away for 75 years into the future. So all that wonderful work. I don't have enough good things to say about Naomi Wolf for all of that stuff. The one questionable part is where this is ultimately going to lead. And then I have some criticisms of how far she has gotten with kind of her progression and some things that I see her kind of struggling with that I dealt with in 2020. And I think that she eventually has to move past those things. I think and hope that she will, but I think there is some room for criticism.
Oh yeah. Especially, I think that what I just read was a political consultant's report card based upon some very, very flawed assumptions. I'm not even going to say outdated stuff. A lot of the stuff that political consultants have been analyzing presidential speeches and trying to get presidential candidates and presidents to stay, quote, on message comes from an era when we really had some misconceptions about what our mainstream media were. Maybe there was some strange time in the misty past when the mainstream media was a bunch of, gumshoes trying to get at the truth. But in my lifetime, and I think probably a little before at least, they were intelligence agency cutouts. For example, the Watergate clowns, the guys who Woodward and Bernstein. It's known at this point these guys were products of those intelligence agencies. And it's just been that way for a really long time. So what we had with presidential speeches and presidential campaigns was intelligence agency reporters reporting on intelligence agency actors. Okay, they did a good job of producing a theatrical production that gave the appearance of adversarialism, but it was always a sham. And then there's the other part of me that knows that that fact is not known by the players, that they are part of a big system where the only people who really know that it's all a fraud are at the very, very tippy top. And I get that from the James Dellingpole piece when Dellingpole said, look, I didn't know that I was part of this mafia. We all just had this institutional conformity and a desire to continue to be in the in crowd. And so when Naomi Wolf says there's so much in this speech that will give the press the ability to say mean things about him, I kind of had to shake my head a little bit because there is definitely a bunch of misconception going on to say such a thing in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. And I will add one more part of that, which is that the elections aren't real. So,
she knows that, and she knows that too.
Right. So what we're talking about is an analysis here of how we used to believe that campaigns functioned and what we used to believe were the deciding factors in an election. And once you account for the factor you just mentioned and the factor I just mentioned, all of this analysis blows up right in her face. And so that's the unfortunate part, because there are other things that she is noticing here that are valuable, but the report card aspect where she is grading him on the quality of his speech in relation to how political campaigns are typically run. That doesn't make any sense at all. And, you know, she is a proponent of how things used to be done. Her experience is in how things used to be done and the messaging that surrounds how things used to be done, but nothing's done like that anymore. It does not matter that Donald Trump didn't give a policy speech. And, you know, maybe if you want to react to that, I want to move on at some point to some of the policy discussion, because I think that policy discussions are pointless.
Yes, they're extremely pointless. That's another thing. Going around and talking about the extreme specifics of what policies you're going to implement is just dumb.
Dumb.
The ones who do that now I just take them, the politicians who come up with these clever policy proposals that I think are super duper based and red pilled. I don't care, because I know it's possible to say all sorts of things that will intoxicate me with how good they sound. But what we've been shown over and over again is that all politicians, except for Donald Trump, he's the exception, just make great policy proposals while trying to get elected and then absolutely throw them in the garbage can right after they're sworn into office. And so it doesn't matter what they say anymore. And we're sort of starting to know that it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, they don't actually have the ability to kind of direct policy in the first place. They are there to implement a policy. I say often on my show, the point of these representatives, from our local representatives to Congress all the way up to the president, the point is not for them to go to Washington or to go into office and represent our interests. That is how it's supposed to be. That's how we're told it is, but that's not how it is. What they are doing is representing a greater agenda and trying to sell it to us in a way that they can, at least passively claim they have respected the wishes of the voters. But they are continually involved in a sales pitch to us. They are trying to sell us on policy ideas so that they can say, oh, the president won because of this policy proposal. Therefore, the voters support this policy proposal. Therefore, we can implement this policy proposal and say that we are doing the democratic will with the consent of those governed. So that in itself is enough to ignore the policy stuff. It's not going to be implemented. And the quote unquote voters out there that demand discussions on policy, that stuff all just sounds moronic to me. They want to discuss the finer points of these various aspects of complete and total fictions that are, told to us to be successes or failures based on a collection of fake statistics that they are able to relay. Oh, well, if we pursue this policy item, we're going to save the American taxpayer $10 billion over the next 3 years. What?
Yes.
We're going to implement 10,000. We're going to build 10,000 homes for the homeless and solve our homeless housing problem. And if you don't support us on this, then you don't care about homeless people. It's all nonsense.
I know, it really is. So I put a comment on this article saying that the article is premised on the assumption that the press is something that can be won over. And that winning it over would even be desirable. And Dr. Wolf actually responded to that saying, well, I'm part of the press, referring to herself. So,
wait, do you mean that she responded to you on Twitter, or are you saying that
she responded
in the content?
She responded in the comments on Substack.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Okay. So I'm part of the press, and that's technically true. But I think when we refer to the press, we're referring to the mainstream media. And if you're part of like an alternative group, if you're part of War Room, if you're part of, if you're a writer on Substack, or if you're Glenn Greenwald, et cetera, at the very least, you're aware that the mainstream media is a fully weaponized intelligence operation designed to prevent the people from having any real say in their government. So I don't really know how to respond to that other than to say, while it is true that, quote unquote, the press is not a monolith, the notion that we could have gotten better headlines out of the fucking Rolling Stone piece.
Yeah.
I think it indicates not fully being all the way there, understanding what's going on here.
Yes, I would actually take that even a little bit further to say that I don't think winning over the press is any priority whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's not the job. So this traditional understanding of politics and political analysis and how things work in this entirely rigged, manipulated, and scripted system, throw all of that in the trash. It is a direct person-to-person thing. Voters need to come to terms with who and what Donald Trump is and what he represents. He is not here to appeal to you on your terms. I know that people don't like this. This is not the ideal way that politics are supposed to be. We are supposed to be, as we are told, presented with a range of possibilities and figure out which ones we align with. Those politicians should then cater to us and our desires in order to win our approval so that we will go out and cast our very legitimate votes for them, thus electing them to office. That is the job as it is commonly described, but that's not the job once again. And there's a great discussion to be had here around Trump's voice and his particular communication style. This is something I've thought about a lot over the last few years. I hope we get into that. But the idea that Trump needs to appeal to certain demographics at this point is crazy.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that he needs to have these messages for suburban women or these messages for Hispanics or these messages for Black Americans, not true. Certainly doesn't need a particular message for the press. The press's coverage cannot help or hurt him. He is beyond that, right? Yes. The reality on the ground, the reality in people's lives is ultimately going to be what dictates where they put their support. And as this reality, the obviousness of how bad this particular reality is, as this continues to emerge and confront people, they move toward Donald Trump no matter what he says. So we're beyond that. And to, kind of return to the policy discussion for just a second, I wrote down in my notes today that anti-policy actually is policy. Trump's policy proposal is to not have policy proposals. Policies in our government under a constitutional system should be ad hoc. If there is something that we need to do, then we should figure out a solution that comports with what the Constitution has set out. We should not be in this. We have this notion that the government is actually supposed to plan how our society is going to go, that we give them the authority to plan everything out for us. And so we want to compare their plans. No, the plan is no plan. The plan is to strip that government away as much as possible. And, taking down the deep state, that's a policy. That is the policy. And it's not, oh, we need this agency to do this. There are those too. Those are described in Project 2025. Naomi Wolf is welcome to go read those policy proposals. But Donald Trump, with a national audience, his job is not to describe policy proposals for us, knowing that they're not going to be implemented in the first place.
Yeah, very true. What about the other criticism that goes like this? And this is something that I think a lot of people would resonate with at first glance. Okay, it's not the base that he needs to win over. It's the malleable middle or the persuadable middle. I also don't find that persuasive.
I don't either.
Yeah.
If people are unable to come to terms with the fact that Donald Trump is the clear and obvious and only choice, that is entirely on them. And the longer they resist that, the more they will dig themselves into their prior understandings of how all this works. And it is going to do nothing but create havoc in their lives. The result here is already in some way inevitable and baked into the cake. We are going forward in this direction. If you don't want to get on board with that, you don't have to. No one is going to force you to. But with things already moving in this direction, we don't need to just stop that momentum in order to come try to gather everyone up and sell them individually on why this obvious only possible move is the right move for them. These people expect to be catered to when they have done nothing at this point over the last 4 years besides support policies, agendas, candidates that destroy the American people's lives. This goes back through to COVID. And Naomi Wolf is very cognizant of all this in relation to COVID. She is growing in that understanding in relation to the elections. And again, this has nothing to do with Naomi Wolf personally, but she doesn't seem to be in touch with how things are going now at all.
Well, the funny thing is, how is anybody supposed to be in touch with how things are going when all the polls are fake too, or at the very least are controlled by people who answer their landlines without checking caller ID, which is a very interesting kind of person, if you ask me.
Well, I would suggest that maybe being specifically tuned in to what real people's experience is. And I'm not saying that Naomi Wolf has no understanding of that. I'm saying that the people she is accounting for in her analysis, generally speaking, are not relevant. And to the extent that she is still a liberal elite in some sense, and she has taken a bunch of heat, but I don't think that she has officially, formally either been exiled from or has left that party of false decorum element. She is still very much aligned with that. Those people cannot decide the outcome of our elections through their votes. They are no longer able to decide the outcome of our elections through control over the media. I'm not certain that they're allowed, that they're why can I speak? That they are still able to determine the outcome of our elections through election manipulation. So what power do those people have when all of their institutional power is being systematically and slowly stripped away from them over these past 4 years? They are being shown to be invalid in the power that they have. So they no longer need to be catered to. And Naomi Wolf still wants these people catered to. Now, if you want to react to that for a second, by all means, cut me off and go ahead. I have one more thing to say about this, though. So in 2020 and in 2021, moving out of that Hollywood liberal elite society and mindset and understanding, I got to the point, and this is primarily in the summer of 2020, where I was thinking to myself with Donald Trump, hey, you know the answers to all of these things. I know you know them because you say them sometimes. Why can't you say them in a way that is going to stop antagonizing these retards so that they will actually figure out that you're not the enemy? I was already convinced. So it wasn't about convincing me. I didn't need Donald Trump to be a different way for my sake, but I thought he needed to be a different way for the sake of other people who needed to be convinced, who I wanted to be convinced. But the truth is, those people don't need to be convinced, not for Donald Trump's sake, not for my sake, not for the sake of the country. Those people can come to the proper understanding, and we will welcome them with open arms when they do, but we don't need to spend our time catering to them and convincing them. I wanted that because that would make it less difficult for me to exist in that society while supporting Donald Trump. And that is what all the Ron DeSantis supporters wanted as well. They don't hate Donald Trump, but they can't support him openly in public without being castigated by that part of society. And so to the extent that that part of society is a necessity in their social lives or in their work lives, supporting Donald Trump is totally inconvenient to them. And they want that inconvenience removed. And that is what Naomi Wolf is ultimately pursuing here.
The desire to get, I see exactly what you're saying. So just to summarize what you're saying there is a big group of elites that Naomi Wolf would very much like to see come a little bit closer, or at least stop calling for the beheading of all Trump supporters, which is essentially what these lunatics are. And that's the part that really mystifies me in trying to figure out how this world that we live in really works. So you have the James Delingpoles, and in this case, the Naomi Wolfs, who come from these elite circles. James Delingpole, for example, I mean, he went to Eton with David Cameron. I mean, these people know each other. And James said, I was never invited into the clubs, the special place, the place where you get like sworn in or whatever it is that they do, the place they go to be body snatched or whatever it is that makes them utterly turn against the population. And apparently the same is true with Naomi Wolf. She saw these vaccine mandates, and this is when she first came to my attention. She saw these vaccine mandates being put down during the incipient parts of the fake Biden administration, and she just started making videos. And it was very simple. In a free society, you can't force people to take drugs. This is just weird. What's wrong with all you people?
Mhm.
She didn't get it. She was like, what? What's going on? You can't force people to do this. Are you nuts? She believes in all the normal. She's still normie. He believes in the vaccine, believes that vaccines are good if they're done right, believes that viruses cause disease, probably still all believes all that stuff. But I saw her have that same look of incredulity about her fellow elites, her fellow Harvard, Yale graduates, etc. What do you think's going on there? Because you and I have talked about this at great length. How the hell does this happen? And what are these elites thinking?
Yeah, I mean, she actually has a great piece on this that you've read on Reading Epic Threads about that holiday party she attended with a lot of these people and how they seem more subdued. They didn't have the flair for dressing up and fashion and partying and art. All these. I kind of sensed this when I returned to Los Angeles in August of 2022. It seemed like everyone knew that they had been tricked and no one wanted to admit it. And I think that Naomi Wolf is very much a part of that culture. And the unfortunate part with the party of false decorum thing is that, your reputation can go, and she's certainly taken reputational hits within a certain society. Now, that certain society, because they are going to primarily go along to get along, they want to eliminate all obstacles in their path to holding on to their social status, their power, their wealth. So they are happy to amend their views whenever it is necessary. And so they have come in Naomi Wolf's direction since then, which then provides Naomi Wolf the illusion that these people are somehow going to eventually align with her when it comes to the important stuff. They are not going to do that. She is still seeking the approval ultimately of these people. They are not going to come around. This is not something that she can even potentially accomplish. But yet I think that she is still catering to that viewpoint, expecting that they will, because people like her don't want to lose these relationships entirely. Some of these people she has probably been friends with and, worked on projects with for the last 30 or 40 years in some cases. And it's not easy to just allow those people to go. I dealt with it in Hollywood. Unfortunately, I didn't have a choice because I said all the no words and they got very, very angry at me and tried to destroy my reputation in public, like on Instagram and other social media sites. In our personal circles, I would hear about different comments. Oh, I've gone crazy, all this other stuff. I'm sure that she has gotten all of that.
Yeah.
I left. She didn't leave. I gave fat middle fingers to all those people and was like, hey, I'm out of here. I will never talk to you ever again. I thought we were friends. I thought we had a mutual respect. You didn't even ask me what I thought before condemning me. So our relationship is now over.
Yeah.
It seems like she's not up for that sifting process. And if I'm getting her wrong, I apologize. Again, I respect her a great deal, but this is a point where people kind of hit the end of their progression along these lines. They cannot even fathom giving up these long personal relationships. And that's ultimately what it's going to take if they're going to be honest in their support for Donald Trump in this movement.
Yeah. And I think that also, I think that it's also important to note that the way that Donald Trump accumulates supporters is not through his speeches. The way Donald Trump accumulates supporters is through how the enemy behaves. And then they see his speeches and attempt to see them in the light of Donald Trump's enemies are an existential threat to everything. Thank God he exists.
Yeah.
And so I don't think Trump is ever trying to scoop up new people. I don't think he's trying to persuade new people in his speeches. And he may start doing that as November 5th gets closer. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But right now, I'm seeing a very simple model of every single speech is designed to inflame the passions of people who have figured out that the establishment, the party of false decorum is an existential threat to everything we hold dear the world over, not just in the United States of America. And so that model is completely contradictory to everything that a political consultant would recommend in a speech. It makes literally no sense in that paradigm.
Yeah, and that has nothing but unfortunate things to say about political consultants. And of course, I mean, who wants to say good things about political consultants? But she's essentially admitting here that she is that the common understanding is to direct candidates to participate in some kind of farce in the way they express themselves and their political priorities. You know, the idea that we can look back on these historical speeches and some of the examples she chose are kind of funny. Looking at the exact wording and the priorities of the speech in particular, the Roman address after the death of Thucydides, the understanding that government actually doesn't work the way that people in the normie mindset believe it does, it changes the meaning of these speeches completely. I actually don't want to hear a politician give me a paean about the importance of our democracy before getting into the heart of their discussion. She also doesn't understand that Donald Trump manipulates a public narrative and actually does know what he's doing far better than Naomi Wolf or anyone else gives him credit for. Sometimes he is intentionally provocative to make it so that the media does freak out about these very messages. And in that spoonful of sugar that they are feeding to the child brains in their audience, they are also smuggling in what Donald Trump's actual message is. She doesn't even accept that there's a possibility that what Trump is doing is strategic and intentional and actually provides another positive benefit other than convincing new voters that he's like a really nice guy that they should support. And it's unfortunate that she doesn't see that. People think that we're conspiracy theorists for remarking on it in the first place, but it very clearly works. And it very clearly is a strategy he pursues nonstop in every Truth Social post. It's Trump's strategy and it works.
It is the desire to. Newt Gingrich said it this way. He said that the press likes to chase rabbits. And so instead of letting the press chase whatever rabbits are out there, Donald Trump intentionally creates rabbits and gets them to chase those rabbits. And one of the best, starkest examples of such was when he tweeted out, I don't know what year it was, and I can't even guess anymore. The years of Trump's first term blend together for me. And I learned that the hard way on the last DPH or possibly on the oh no, it was on the Liberty Den. I said that Ricky Gervais's speech was the really good one at the Golden Globes. I thought that was 2016. No, it was freaking 2020. I was off by 4 years. Anyway. Whoa. Yeah. I felt like I'd had a stroke because I was dead level certain it was a 2016 Golden Globes. So, but I digress. What was I talking about? Yeah. So I don't know what year it was, but Donald Trump let out a tweet that was at Mar-a-Lago, I think. It was at Mar-a-Lago, and Joe and Mika came up to me and they wanted to sit with me, but Mika was bleeding very badly from a facelift. So I said no.
Brilliant.
Now, I was already awake-ish at that point, and all I was thinking to myself, what is he up to? And then I figured out the day that he did that tweet, first thing that happened was the mainstream media networks literally dropped all their coverage to talk about that tweet. I mean, all of them. It was fucking weird. I was like, are you people retarded? And what was actually going down in Congress was there was a very strongly worded bill trying to get through Congress that was anti-illegals. And I am certain to this day that Donald Trump put out that, that very provocative tweet so that the people in Congress who are cowards and idiots who read the New York fucking Times and worry that it's going to say something bad about them, gave them cover to vote for this thing that Donald Trump wanted them to vote for. How many times has Donald Trump pulled this exact same maneuver? And the notion that Donald Trump is just a goofball, weirdo guy with impulse control problems is a necessary component of being able to pull off that maneuver. So I don't know. It's like he's got Jedi mind control over a lot of elite types, because no matter how obvious the maneuver gets to us, if you still think that Donald Trump is just a dude with impulse control problems, it's impossible to see that maneuver for what it is strategically.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's clear to me that Naomi Wolf does not properly understand who Donald Trump is and what his character really is, what his mental and emotional makeup really is. There are certain elements of the official story in the central narrative about Donald Trump that people have a really hard time letting go of, including Trump supporters, including, and I know people who are old school establishment kind of Republicans, more conservative than the establishment, voted for Trump twice and happily admit it, but still can't get past the idea that Trump's not dumb and not an egomaniac. He's not just shooting his mouth off at inopportune times. He actually does know what he's doing.
Yeah.
The guy is a lifelong celebrity, maybe an FBI informant,
Yep.
a billionaire real estate investor, a builder, like monumental celebrity, maybe the most famous person in the world right now, a television star, and then someone who not only won the presidency, but in the process defeated the Clinton machine, the Bush machine, the McCain machine, the Romney machine. How many political machines? I'm probably leaving some off.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing all of this while every institution of old guard power attacks him all the time. That's not something that can be done by a stupid person. And he is now back again, more popular than he ever was. The idea that that's somehow just some random act of circumstance it's not possible. And to say one more thing about Trump's communication patterns, there are a few people on our side of things that the left takes this interpretation on. Mike Lindell is another one, because he has this speech pattern that is very grating to the college educated. We were taught, and I certainly was, I imagine that you were to some extent too, that one's eloquence and ability to represent themselves as an intellectual is part of what allows them to be taken seriously by a certain kind of person. Some of the stupidest people I know are extraordinarily well-spoken, and they are able to memorize entire scripts worth of ideas from the Joe Rogan podcast or Rachel Maddow's MSNBC show. And they can regurgitate those ideas in intelligent sounding ways. And other people will then think, oh, that person's intelligent. They know those same smart thoughts that I heard on TV, and they're able to express them. That is intelligence. Whereas Mike Lindell or Donald Trump, while they have actually accomplished real things in their lives, they don't just have an abstract projection of power. They have actually accomplished things. They speak in a certain way that leads these sorts of people to believe that they are stupid, and these people tune them out right away. And again, that is only to their own detriment.
Yeah, very much so. All right. So we said, I told you I'd keep you for 30 minutes only, but I think that the topics that we haven't touched on yet are some of the speech patterns or speaking style choices that Trump makes that maybe Dr. Wolf gets right, or at least understands better than the average person. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that she is at least understanding from a Trump supporter's perspective what it is that they are able to attach to, while herself not being much of a Trump supporter yet. Now, I think if the election were held today, she probably would vote for Donald Trump. That is what I assume. again, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Naomi Wolf. I think that she is representative of a certain mindset that I believe that I do understand and experienced at some point throughout 2020. But it's not enough. There's something much deeper. There's a deeper connection there between Trump and his supporters, and it's that they want the American government to be as it was intended and as they were told it functions. And they want everything else removed and done away with. It is not simply that these people made mistakes during COVID and may have stolen the presidential election. It's that the entire system is corrupted, and we need that guy to rid the system of that stuff. However hard he goes is not hard enough. And when the country fully understands what has been done to them and what has been done in their names, then supporting Donald Trump is going to be appealing to everybody. We're not going to get to that 85 or 90% mark, which I do think that we can reach by Donald Trump taking a softer approach and trying to appeal to voters that may not like him yet. They've had 9 years to figure out what's going on, and they haven't done it. It's going to take more than that. And once they have that jarring moment that actually does get them to that point, Trump is going to be the obvious conclusion, and he doesn't need to do anything to cater to them in the meantime.
Yeah. Wow. So I know that we're probably going to talk about the Supreme Court decision at some point tonight if we get with do a special presentation or something like that, because I know it's important. But how would you tease that discussion? Because I know that we talked about it, but this 9-0 Supreme Court decision is definitely an important moment, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So when they did oral arguments a month ago, something that really just caught my ear was a particular part of the discussion between Ketanji Brown Jackson and the attorney on the Anderson side, Jason Murray, where she asked specifically about what might be enforceable after the election. And that is a big part of the majority opinion today. They move the responsibility. They say that the states are not able to remove someone from the ballot. That should be returned to the Congress, and the Congress could actually vote to determine that Donald Trump had committed insurrection and broken his oath and would therefore be disqualified in a self-enforcing fashion. It would make it so that Donald Trump would be ineligible to serve as president, and that could happen after the election, between the election and the certification. And I've been keying in onto that for a couple of months because there are comments from people like Liz Cheney. There are opinions written in the New York Times about the post-election strategy, and that actually being the strategy, that the election will not be decided on election day. It'll be contested all the way up till January 6th, 2025, which we were formally told constitutes an insurrection. Yeah. So they're going to that thing. Now the Supreme Court, despite deciding in Trump's favor on this narrow issue, has created the opportunity for the Congress to go after this in a different setting. Sidney Blumenthal, the former Clinton hack, wrote an article in The Guardian a couple weeks back about that exact strategy. We have seen this pop up over and over and over again. It is a key point of discussion today. So while it's good that the decision was rendered 9-0 in favor of the Trump side here, I don't think that the issue by any stretch is over. And I think that this very decision and the terms of this decision might come back in a major way after the election.
Yeah, I think so too. A ton of things are going to come in after the election because I feel strongly that there is a possibility that Donald Trump has the whole system rigged to have the outcome that he wants, and that after the reinstallation of a public facing Trump administration, that is the moment when we will actually get the election reform that we need so desperately in order to save our society, because that's how dire it is from a trust in our institutions perspective. A lack of trust in the institutions, once that fully takes hold of a population, a clock starts ticking for the civilization itself to go through some sort of horrible collapse. But hopefully we'll be able to discuss that at greater length sometime tonight, because this is a big deal. That Taylor versus Beckham
That case is very interesting. And yeah, is that the name of that case? That
Yeah, Taylor versus Beckham.
okay,
Or
yeah.
possibly Beckham versus Taylor. It's one of the two.
Yeah, Kentucky, what year is this? In 1900.
1900. Yeah.
Yeah, Kentucky case before the Supreme Court in 1900. Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. John pointed this out to Patrick and I this morning in a group text. And that case is about a gubernatorial election in Kentucky where the Republican winner was deemed not to have won. The Democrat, so they contested his win.
Mhm.
A couple thousand of his votes were invalidated, making the Democrat the winner. The Democrat was then shot. He was sworn in from
On
his
his
deathbed.
deathbed.
Yes. And then the Democrat lieutenant governor actually took over as governor of Kentucky. Absolutely wild.
That is absolutely 100% wild. Hopefully we'll get to talk about that at great lengths. Pretty funny because the Kentucky gubernatorial election recently, over
Yes.
and over again, is just a hilariously obvious theft that even the patriot leaders can't figure out is theft. So I don't even know what to do about that. Hey, can you plug your Substack
Sure.
and your podcast for everybody?
Yeah, guys, you can find my Substack at I'm your moderator.substack.com. My podcast is posted there. Usually I shoot for 5 days a week. Sometimes it's 4, sometimes rarely it's 3. Paid subscribers get access to the show that day. It goes free to everyone else 36 hours later on Substack and other podcast platforms. It's on Rumble as well. Linktree.com/I'm your moderator for all the links.
Absolutely. I listen, guys. I listen to Chris's podcast pretty darn often, and I don't really consume much content. So definitely check that out. Chris, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll be able to do some kind of a live stream on the Supreme Court tonight. And thanks for coming, man. Really great discussion.
Sir. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye. All right, everybody. That is the brilliant Chris Paul. I'm your moderator.substack.com. Don't forget to get your orange infused angel paste. You can get that at angelpaste.com, promo code Shapiro, or epicthreads.tv, promo code Shapiro. You get 3 or more bottles, you get free shipping. Check it out, guys. Your skin will drink it up. All right, that does it for me today. Thank you to Dr. Naomi Wolf. That's naomiwolf.substack.com. You can also check her out at dailyclout.io. A great member of this community. Really I'm always delighted with her work, even when I don't agree with it. So definitely check that out as well. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow.
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.